Preface. 1990. In the decade since the death of nature first appeared, its major themes have been reinforced. Today, a global ecological crisis that goes beyond the environmental crisis of the 1970s threatens the health of the entire planet. Ozone depletion, carbon dioxide buildup, chlorofluorocarbon emissions, and acid rain upset the respiration and clog the pores and lungs of the ancient Earth Mother, rechristened Gaia by atmospheric chemist James Lovelock. Toxic wastes, pesticides, and herbicides seep into groundwater, marshes, bays, and oceans, polluting Gaia's circulatory system. Tropical rainforests and northern old-growth forests disappear at alarming rates as lumberers shear Gaia of her tresses. Entire species of plants and animals become extinct each day. A new partnership between humans and the Earth is urgently needed. Celebrating the 25th anniversary of Rachel Carson's Silent Spring 1962, a 1987 conference on ecofeminist perspectives called upon women to lead an ecological revolution to restore planetary ecology. During the past decade, women over the entire globe have emerged as ecological activists. In Sweden, they have protested the use of herbicides on forests by offering jam made from tainted berries to members of parliament. In India, they joined the Chipko, or tree-hugging, movement to preserve fuelwood for cooking in protest over market lumbering. In Kenya's Greenbelt movement, they planted millions of trees in an effort to reverse desertification. In England, they camped for many years at Greenham Common to protest the deployment of nuclear missiles that threatened the continuation of life on Earth. German women helped to found the Greens Party as a platform for a green future for the country and the planet. Native American women protested uranium mining linked with an increased number of cancer cases on their reservations. At Love Canal near Niagara Falls, housewives demanded action from New York state offices over an outbreak of birth defects and miscarriages in a neighborhood built on the site of a former hazardous chemical dump. Simultaneously, feminist scholars were producing an explosion of books on ancient goddesses that became the basis for a renewed earth-rooted spirituality. They revived interest in statues, images, poetry, and rituals surrounding prehistoric earth goddesses, the Mesopotamian Inanna, the Egyptian Isis, the Greek goddesses Demeter and Gaia, the Roman Ceres, and European paganism, as well as Asian, Latin American, and African female symbols and myths. Concerts, street theater, solstice and equinoctial rituals, poetry, bookstores, and lecture series celebrated human resonance with the earth. Yet these celebrations of the connection between women and nature contain an inherent contradiction. If women overtly identify with nature and both are devalued in modern Western culture, don't such efforts work against women's prospects for their own liberation? Is not the conflation of woman and nature a form of essentialism? Are not women admitting that by virtue of their own reproductive biology they are in fact closer to nature than men and that indeed their social role is that of caretaker? Such actions seem to cement existing forms of oppression against both women and nature, rather than liberating either. But concepts of nature and women are historical and social constructions. There are no unchanging, essential, characteristics of sex, gender, or nature. Individuals form concepts about nature and their own relationships to it that draw on the ideas and norms of the society into which they are born, socialized, and educated. People living in a given period construct nature in ways that give meaning to their own lives as elites or ordinary people, men or women, Westerners or Easterners. The historian must ask, how have people historically conceptualized nature? How have they behaved in relationship to that construction? What historical evidence supports a particular interpretation? Between the 16th and 17th centuries, the image of an organic cosmos with a living female Earth at its center gave way to a mechanistic worldview in which nature was reconstructed as dead and passive, to be dominated and controlled by humans. The death of nature deals with the economic, cultural, and scientific changes through which this vast transformation came about. In seeking to understand how people conceptualized nature in the scientific revolution, I am asking not about unchanging essences, but about connections between social change and changing constructions of nature. Similarly, when women today attempt to change society's domination of nature, they are acting to overturn modern constructions of nature and women as culturally passive and subordinate. When the historian raises questions about the way nature was viewed in another era, she is also asking questions meaningful to her own epoch. One reason the historical changes described in The Death of Nature are of interest is that we may be experiencing a similar revolution today. The machine image that has dominated Western culture for the past 300 years seems to be giving way to something new. Some call the transformation a new paradigm, others call it deep ecology, still others call for a postmodern ecological worldview. Emerging over the past decade are a number of scientific proposals that challenge the scientific revolution's mechanistic view of nature. According to physicist David Bohm, a mechanistic science based on the assumption that matter is divisible into parts, such as atoms, electrons, or quarks moved by external forces, may be giving way to a new science based on the primacy of process. In the early 20th century, he argues, relativity and quantum theory began to challenge mechanism. Relativity theory postulated that fields with varying strengths spread out in space. Strong, stable areas, much like whirlpools in a flowing stream, represent particles. They interact with and modify each other, but were still considered external to and separate from each other. Quantum mechanics mounted a greater challenge. Motion is not continuous, as in mechanistic science, but occurs in leaps. Particles, such as electrons, behave like waves, while waves, such as light waves, behave like particles depending on the experimental context. Context dependence, which is antithetical to mechanism and part of the organic worldview, is a fundamental characteristic of matter. Bohm's process physics challenges mechanism still further. He argues that instead of starting with parts as primary and building up wholes as secondary phenomena, a physics is needed that starts with undivided, multidimensional wholeness, a flow of energy called the hollow movement, and derives the three-dimensional world of classical mechanics as a secondary phenomenon. The explicate order of the classical world in which we live unfolds from the implicate order contained in the underlying flow of energy. Another challenge to mechanism comes from the new thermodynamics of Ilya Prigogine. The equilibrium and near-equilibrium thermodynamics of 19th-century classical physics had beautifully described, closed, isolated systems such as steam engines and refrigerators. Prigogine's far from equilibrium thermodynamics allows for the possibility that higher levels of organization can spontaneously emerge out of disorder when a system breaks down. His approach applies to social and ecological systems, which are open rather than closed, and helps to account for biological and social evolution. The recent emergence of chaos theory in mathematics suggests that deterministic, linear, predictive equations, which form the basis of mechanism, may apply to unusual rather than usual situations. Chaos, in which a small effect may lead to a large effect, may be the norm. Thus, a butterfly flapping its wings in Iowa can result in a hurricane in Florida. Most environmental and biological systems, such as changing weather, population, noise, non-periodic heart fibrillations, and ecological patterns, may be governed by nonlinear chaotic relationships. Chaos theory reveals patterns of complexity that lead to a great understanding of global behaviors, but militate against over-reliance on the simple predictions of linear differential equations. What all these developments point to is the possibility of a new worldview that could guide 21st-century citizens in an ecologically sustainable way of life. The mechanistic framework that legitimated the Industrial Revolution with its side effects of resource depletion and pollution may be losing its efficacy as a framework. A non-mechanistic science and an ecological ethic, however, must support a new economic order grounded in the recycling of renewable resources, the conservation of non-renewable resources, and the restoration of sustainable ecosystems that fulfill basic human physical and spiritual needs. Perhaps Gaia will then be healed.